Before I start, I do want to mention that I picked up 4 years ago with my wife and my children, who at that time were 5 and 7, and moved from San Francisco to Paris. So if any of you, I'm not going to talk about that now because I don't have time, but afterward, if you'd like to talk to somebody who recently actually did this with school-age children, and also telecommutes from Paris, which I can tell you is actually possible. All of the hours are murder. I'll be happy to talk to you about that, but not now. I'm going to talk about fractional ownership. Here's what our law firm does. We do only fractional ownership. That's all we've ever done in my legal career, and we've seen it all. You name it, we've done it. Communes, religious organizations, intentional communities, wine-growing groups, and vacation fractionals, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. So why do people do this? What is fractional ownership? The first thing to say about fractional ownership is that it is ownership. It's not just a right to use. That's what distinguishes fractional ownership from most timeshares. People actually own it. They own it in perpetuity. Typically, a fractional ownership group consists of 4 to 13 owners per home. It can be smaller or larger, but that's the most classic size. They have a Bible, as it were, a comprehensive agreement that defines their rights and responsibilities with regard to the property. That's very important. Not everyone follows the agreement religiously, and that's okay. It's really there to fall back on if there is a disagreement in the future. And I can tell you from doing this for 25 years that it's the people that have the agreement that never need it, and it's the people that don't have the agreement that it turns out actually need it. So even though you're doing it with your family or your friends, I'm a great believer in getting an agreement so that you can put it in the drawer and never look at it. Fractional ownerships can be resold. They can be bequeathed, left to people. They can be gifted. Everything you can do with real estate, you can do with fractional real estate. But there can also be a global exit plan, so that if for whatever reason you don't want the only exit to be selling your fractional, there can also be an arrangement in advance where the whole property is sold after a certain amount of time and the proceeds are split up. So why do people do this? The most important reason is that it turns out that most people who own second homes only visit them about 30 days a year. This statistic has been tested and held up year after year. So what happens to the property the rest of the time? Well, it sits there. And there's a guilt factor of that. I owned my apartment in Paris for a number of years before we actually moved, and we got there 1 to 2 months a year, and the rest of the time it sat there idle, and we felt bad about it. And we felt bad about going other places when we had the apartment in Paris. So I think the fact that people don't go to their apartment or their home as often as they might is a big reason why people look to fractionals. It links the amount of time that you spend, the amount of effort, and the amount of money that you spend with what you're actually likely to use. There's fewer hassles than whole ownership. I know we've heard a lot about how easy it is to buy a second home. I can tell you from my own personal experience, it wasn't that easy, at least in my case. It's also a much greener alternative when compared to whole ownership, because when you think about it, if all of us have our own second home or perhaps third homes, that's a lot of building materials, a lot of drain on the environment that goes into building all those homes so they can sit empty a good portion of the year. It's not necessarily a sustainable model going forward. Lower risk, you can diversify, you can own more than one, whereas with the resources that you might put into owning a second home, you can own 5 fractionals. You can diversify your risk, you can diversify your vacation experience, and visit more places. What about France specifically? What about fractional ownership in France? Unlike, say, having an apartment in Lenox or in the Hamptons, in France, you're not going to be able to go there for the weekend very easily, so you're going to get there probably even less frequently than you might with another more local second home. The buying process, in my opinion, is a bit more complicated in a foreign country than it is here. Buying a fractional, it's much simpler because, again, you have more people to share it with. Sometimes there's a developer involved. Waleed's going to talk about that a little bit. that can make it easier too. And there's not just the process of buying, but there's also the process of renovating, the borrowing the money, the managing the property on an ongoing basis. All of these things are basically made much more easy when you do it fractionally. The cultural language barrier, I mean, those of you that study here maybe have a leg up on that. I didn't study at the Alliance Française before I went. I should have probably. I found that the cultural and language barrier was something to overcome for myself. How does fractional ownership really work? How does the legal structure for fractional ownership work? Well, when we go to set up a legal structure for fractional ownership, we look at two key issues. The first is enforcing the agreement. How easy or hard is it going to be to enforce the agreement? Can we get it done cheaply, quickly, and is the outcome going to be predictable? That's the number one criteria that we look for in a legal structure. Secondly, we want to be able, as I mentioned before, to sell and bequeath our shares relatively inexpensively and quickly and with, again, a predictable outcome. Now, typically in the US, because our laws are very friendly on these issues for deeded ownership, so in other words, if you have a deed to a fraction, you can easily enforce the agreement. You can easily transfer shares. Most U.S. ownership is, fractional ownership is deeded. You're actually got a bunch of people on the longer than they're supposed to stay in the unit. We typically use a structure that has some sort of a company involved, like a Société Civile Immobilier that Sam talked about a few minutes ago. We often also use U.S. entities like nonprofit corporations and limited liability companies to make sure that we can accomplish these two key goals that I mentioned earlier. The most common fractional ownership structure in France is where you use both things. You have an SCE at the ground level that owns the property, and above that you have a nonprofit corporation or an LLC that controls the SCE and that the U.S. owners own. And so effectively what the U.S. owners have, although they own the property, they own it through a U.S. vehicle, which means that everything that happens here. Enforcement happens here, transfer happens here, inheritance happens here, and so on, which means you're working in a familiar language, in a familiar legal environment. You know what's going on. You can read the documents. You can understand them. You don't have to deal with as many. You still have to deal with some French issues, but not nearly as many as you would if you used a purely French structure. The most important thing in fractional ownership, of course, is the usage. That's what it's all about. Usage has got to be organized for people to share property. So when I think about usage and explain usage, I talk about the when, the where, and the who of the usage. When? When are you supposed to go? There's a variety of different approaches to this. You can have a fixed calendar where people come at the same time each year. You can have a rotation system where one owner comes for a month and another owner comes for a month or a week or whatever, where the rotation just changes a bit each year so that everyone gets the property all the time. You can have a reservation system, sort of like a sports draft, where every year there's a system to determine who picks first and everyone picks their time. And then you can also have, and many of the larger fractional arrangements have, an unlimited short notice usage system so that only some of the time is structured through the fixed calendar or the automatic rotation or the draft system, and other time is left open so that owners can basically use it on a space available basis. They just call up the manager and they say, is anyone going to be there at such and such a time? And if nobody's going to be there, then they can reserve it for themselves. So that's the when. What about the where? Where does the owner visit? Well, when the fractional ownership is just a single home or condominium, of course, it's clear where the owner goes. They go to that shared home. But even that is not as simple as it seems these days, because one of the really nice things that's happening in the world of fractionals is exchanges. So even though you might always technically have the right to go to the same house, there might be an exchange overlay that you have, and that can be, there can even be an exchange overlay if it's a single home that you just bought with your friends or family or with a small developer that just organizes a single home, because now there's all sorts of really neat exchange programs that you can subscribe to so that you don't always have to go to the same place if you don't want to. If you do want to, of course, you visit the same place. So there's also development companies where the developer has projects in different places, and you can internally exchange other places within the system. So that's the where. What about the who? The who is important for usage too, because it may be that you don't just want to go yourself. Maybe you want to send your brother or your children or your grandparents or your business associates or your friends. Or rentals. What about rentals? You can't go. You don't want to send anyone that you know. Can the property be rented out during your time and you generate the rental income? Having a rental element to your fractional program is becoming more and more expensive in these relatively hard times. People really care about rentals. And many of the management companies will provide a rental overlay for you. So they'll rent out the property for you, take a little bit for their costs, and then pass on the rest of the money to you. Beyond usage, of course, the management of the property is critical. You need to have a budget which describes all of the expenses to operate the property as well as the reserves, so there's money available to paint it and to refinish the floors and to replace the furniture periodically, replace all the things in the house. You want that all to be budgeted out and built into the dues system, so that when it comes time to put in new drapes, you don't have to call a meeting and decide, do we really need new drapes? This guy says, no, I think the drapes are fine, and the woman says, oh, no, the drapes are really tired, they look awful. You eliminate all that by having it all budgeted in, so that when the drapes need to be replaced, whoever's managing can just replace the drapes. No meetings, no hassles. Professional management. For obvious reasons, it's really nice, especially when the property's far away, to have a professional management company who's running this property to make sure you have a good experience every time you come. Limited owner involvement, but ultimate owner control. I think that's really the key to having a fraction. Even if it's just you and your family, I think you want to have a system that runs itself without a lot of your involvement, unless you want to be involved. But on the other hand, you don't necessarily want to sign up with somebody for life. In other words, you don't necessarily want to buy into a fractional system that's run by a certain company where you're basically stuck with that company, even if they've come on hard times or sort of lost interest in the property, moved on to the next development or what have you. So I think you want a balance between professional management and owner control. And of course, this issue of exit strategy is critical. You want to make sure that you know how you're going to be able to get out of this. If you want to, you want it to be systematic and predictable. Some resale issues that we deal with in fractionals. Do you have to hold it for a certain amount of time before you resell? It's something that you want to look at as a buyer. Am I stuck in this thing for a certain number of years, or can I sell anytime I want? Should there be a right of first refusal, so that if somebody wants to sell their share, the other owners have the right to buy it? That can be used as a shield to keep somebody unwanted from coming into the group, or as a way for owners to accumulate more and more interest in the property if they want to. There's also, in some groups, buyer approval, where a buyer actually has to get vetted by the group, sort of co-op, New York co-op style. Some people like that, some people don't. And then the issue of guaranteed exit. This is, I mentioned in passing before, this is where there's a procedure where the property is definitely going to be sold at a particular time, or perhaps at a particular time the group can vote to sell it, and maybe the number of votes needed to sell goes down, so it's a majority at 10 years, but maybe it's only 2 people at 5 years, and maybe at 15 years, and maybe at 20 years, just 1 person can vote to sell it. So, merci for coming and letting me speak tonight.